Muy buenos días, señoras y señores.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to everyone present here. This panel is themed under the coordination between search processes and investigation. In the first part end, we're going to count on the presence of 4 panel speakers, 3 in person and 1 online. I'd like to highlight that the approach of this panel is to explore how the search efforts can be integrated with criminal investigations in order to guarantee a holistic approach for the search for truth and discuss about the coordination between the judiciary, extrajudiciary, and community means. So I would like to highlight some aspects that I believe are key for this panel. First, I would like to highlight that the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances instaures the obligation to perform the search and to conduct investigations aimed at identifying those responsible, bring them to justice, and, where necessary, prosecute them. Principle number 13, the guiding principles for the search for the missing people, is focusing on the need for the search of the missing person to be articulated with the penal search so that both are mutually reinforced and so that they are performed with the same degree of effectiveness and efficacy. It's highlighted yesterday by another panel speaker, and I believe it's key to remind us of that fact today here. Where he is matters, but also who did it. In practical terms, the coordination between the search and the penal investigation can be a struggle, and several tensions can arise or even conflict. The possible frictions can be exaggerated by the creation, in some cases, of extrajudiciary mechanisms different from the pre-existing ones, thus rendering the coordination more complicated and at the same time of the utmost essence. The fragmentation and lack of coordination translates into delays into the establishment of the whereabouts and the fate of the missing people and the search for justice. The search for the missing people and the criminal investigation of the disappearance continue to be, for several states, continue to be a challenge and a pending debt with the victims. The uncertainty, because of lack of knowledge of the truth of what happened, prevents the relatives to close the grieving process because of that breach to the human being dignity. This panel lends us the opportunity to exchange experiences, good practices, lessons learned on how to coordinate the search of the missing persons and the criminal investigation of the disappearance. And we also would like to find out about the experience and to try to leverage the lessons learned of the brave searching women. It is a pleasure, and I'm humbled to introduce our panel speakers. We have another person online. We have Federico ANDREU-GUZMAN, who is a jurist, Colombian, and the Director of Litigation and Legal Protection from the Colombian Commission of Jurists. He has been working as General Advisor of the International Commission of Jurists and Advisor for American Asia at Amnesty International, and he has also participated at the Haiti mission for the human rights from the United Nations, also in Rwanda, and he was advisor at several cases of impunity, military courts, the rights of victims, terrorism, and international law, where he played a crucial role at the discussion and the drafting of the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. We're also accompanied by Ms. Yolanda Moran, Mexican, the mother of Dan Fernandez, a missing person for years. She's the director of the Búscame group, lending advice to the families of the disappeared in Mexico, at the central part of the country. And this collective group is part of the Por Nuestros Desaparecidos in Mexico group, and they do work in advocacy in the disappearance of people. She's a mother, a woman, a fighter, relentless fighter. And we're also accompanied by Carla Quintana Osuna, recently appointed as head of the Independent Institution on Missing Persons in the Syrian Arab Republic. Carla is Mexican, lawyer. She was a commissioner at the National Commission for Search in Mexico, an expert in the special jurisdiction for peace, and she has also worked in Colombia. She was working in the Inter-American Human Rights, Latin American Human Rights Commission, and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And we will have Raquel Cardenas from Peru online, Senior Prosecutor of the Higher Prosecution Services and Coordinator of the Human Rights System of the General Prosecutor's Office in Peru. So we're going to have 7 minutes allocated to each other. We are going to foster an active interaction, and I'm going to begin with Federico Andreu. We'd like for him to talk about the challenges that can appear in the coexistence of judiciary mechanisms and extrajudiciary mechanisms for the search, which can be the advantages of those mechanisms and how they contribute to the investigation and the search of the missing people. Federico, you hold the floor for 7 minutes, and we're really keen to know how those mechanisms foster truth, justice, and redress for the victims. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. And thank you very much, Carmen, Rosa. Well, I think a first relevant point to get started would be to think about why the extrajudiciary search mechanisms have arisen as replacement of the judiciary searches. And I think they were born because of the experience for decades of what the judiciary search of the missing people has been. And the conclusion, because of the different practices, regardless of the degree of commitment of a certain Mr. X prosecutor, we can say that the judiciary struggled to incorporate the input of searching for the missing person. And the criminal prosecution has to do with the identification of the perpetrators and to find them guilty and to punish them. But the element of the search of the missing person becomes a marginal, an accessory element. Eventually, if we find the person, well, we rescue the person or we rescue the remains, but it's not the essential purpose. And in the case of Colombia, this was one of the fundamental factors to talk about the humanitarian extrajudiciary search mechanism for the victims. And the Constitutional Court has the ruling and reaches the conclusion that, in general terms, the criminal judiciary system does not respond, does not cater to the need of the search of the victim. And I think that's a pivoting point. And then another important factor, another lesson learned, is that the role that is played by the relatives in the search is absolutely limited. Obviously, it needs to be framed within the criminal proceeding, depending on the figure of the country, if we're talking about the prosecutor or whatever, and there's limited possibilities of engagement and participation in the search. And there is a relationship of I request this, and then the prosecutor's office informs me of what they have done. I challenge a decision if I don't agree, and then let's wait and see what the prosecutor's office says. And then eventually I need to go to a judge in order to amend the situation. But then on the other hand, and in the Colombian case, the extrajudiciary search process by legal mandate states that the search process, the investigation, the location, the surveying of the land, etc., until the end, until the delivery of the missing person or the re-encounter with the missing person, states that the relatives need to participate all throughout the process. And that's essential. First, because all of us working with enforced disappearances know that the relatives know how to search. Sometimes they lack the academic training, but they do know. They know where to start looking. They have learned. The people that can teach us better how to search is the relatives, and that's their fight. So how to bring in that that knowledge in the search processes? Well, the extrajudiciary process allows for that to happen, but not in the criminal proceedings. And then there's also an obligation by the states to guarantee the right for truth, and in the case of the disappeared people, to locate the whereabouts and the fate of the missing person. And that right involves the right to be engaged, to participate in the search. And I believe that the extrajudiciary mechanism, in principle, can guarantee and guarantees in many cases that right. And that boosts the possibilities of the search of extrajudiciary search mechanisms, as opposed to the judiciary mechanisms. And it's plain to say that the extrajudiciary process lacks the purpose of justice, because for that we have the judiciary system, but rather the purpose of satisfying that unbreakable right. And as Luis Juan's principle of impunity states, it does not prescribe, that right does not prescribe the right to know the whereabouts of the missing person and the fate of that person. And that's where the big difference lies with the criminal process. It's focused on the search, on the satisfaction of the right to know. And that's an essential element. Another element which is worth highlighting is what you mentioned, what you were asking, Carmen Rosa, which is the relationship between justice and search. And the states sometimes are tempted to say, well, we search for that person and we find him, and that's it. There will be no justice, just like we mentioned years ago with the economic reparations. Well, we provide with money, and that's it. There's no justice. We're talking about different obligations and different rights. The obligation by the state to bring into justice the people responsible for the enforced disappearances, and another thing is the obligation to search and find and locate the missing person. Those are two different obligations, and as well as stated by Jaime Rosa, they are included differently in the Convention for Enforced Disappearances and the guiding principles adopted by the Commission of Enforced Disappearances reinforce that. And in the case of America, there is a tremendous amount of jurisprudence, and they say that the right to search is an autonomous right on its own, which needs to be preserved and guaranteed, which is different from the right to get justice and for the facts to be investigated. So you might think, well, up until now, classically, these two rights go through the same path, the judiciary, but it's not the most optimum one in order to resolve the right to know the truth. And it's important to break that into two fields, the extrajudiciary and the judiciary search and the prosecution of the people responsible. But then how do they nourish one another? Because the judiciary investigation of the crime and the perpetrators provides with a lot of information of the potential whereabouts and fate of the missing person. Where is that person? And at the same time, the search process can provide with a lot of information regarding who perpetrated that crime, under which circumstances, which are the reasons, who are the authors. The thing is how that reciprocal feedback loop works between the investigation and the search, and there's different experiences depending on the legal framework we're talking about. Let me just talk about the Colombian case, because we have our colleagues from Mexico and the prosecutor from Peru, which are different experiences. There's many different experiences. So in Colombia, we opted for a peculiar system. The criminal investigation is conducted by two jurisdictions, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, which is a transitional justice institution, transitional, not transactional, and then the ordinary prosecutors proceedings when it's not dealing with the armed conflict. So then there is feedback between the information. But there is a limit. If you're subject to the Justice for Peace special jurisdiction, you can be forced to appear before the unit of search. But the unit of search cannot administer criminal justice, which does not preclude from criminal investigation. So the findings of the whereabouts, the material evidence that is conveyed, that is transferred, but that poses difficulties. It is not solved in practical terms how to do that, but up until now it has worked, we can say. It didn't pose a problem. And in that sense, in each national system, we need to look for ways in which we can surmount the hindering and the obstacles in the search for the missing person and the investigation for justice, and to look for the fine-tuned feedback loop. And that's a challenge. And I would leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Federico. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Yolanda Moran, and I would like for you to share which is the methodology that has been developed by the relatives of the missing persons in the search of their loved ones in their country, and how this relates to the investigation, the obstacles, and the recommendations that you would provide to the states in order to effectively respond to the needs of the families and the civil society organizations claiming for search and for justice. You hold the floor for 7 minutes, Ms. Yolanda. Thank you so much. Good morning to you all. Well, to stick to the time that has been allocated, I have left it written, and I can share it later on if you would like to read the paper. Well, the union of the families is the most efficient tool to demand our rights to our authorities, but this needs to be accompanied by other actions. And let me just share the main 5 ones, the top 5. The first one is rendering these actions more visible. Do these actions respond to the need to render our fight more visible and to execute lobbying to our authorities and also the 10th of May marches of the mothers and then the showing of the pictures of our loved ones, and then the 30th of August, the International Day of the Missing Persons, where we have mirror marches all around the country. And then another tool is the legislation that we have. We built a special legislation in order to have expert institutions targeting the search for missing people. But then also we executed reforms in order to name the crime that did not exist in our country. And then another one to protect the assets and the legal personality of the disappeared. Among them, we have the general law for the victims. The second one is the general law in enforced disappearances, and then the federal law for the declaration of absence, and another one is the state level legislation of Coahuila de Zaragoza for exhumation. And there's 35 states in Mexico, and only this state that I have named has this exhumation legislation. And then another effort in the strengthening, in the institutional strengthening of the investigation. But the investigation is insufficient. So since 2015, families needed to go out to start searching with their own hands, tools, and resources in the hope that at least there could be more advances, at least in the identification process by the states. We created brigades for the search of the missing person alive, and then the forensic search brigades, and then the collective on the field searches, and then the sticking of templates in our search and accompaniment to the authorities in the search processes, among other actions. And then the identification phase is of the utmost importance, with more than 72,000 unidentified bodies and the collapsed medical forensic services. We have placed a bet on extraordinary mechanisms for forensic identification so that we don't depend on the prosecutor's office, because the humanitarian side is of the utmost importance so that we can bring back the identity to the families. And we have the extrajudicial identification process, forensic identification process, that we fostered in the search committees, and then the Center for Human Identification. Another mechanism that served us a lot is the support networks. Alliances are of the utmost importance in order to streamline strategies and capacity for advocacy. We have international bodies like the Red Cross, SID, the United Nations, among others, and we also have the NGOs. What can I say? Dialogue, negotiation, and joint work with the authorities is the strategy that has yielded the best results. It's not easy, but with respect, and especially with the love for our missing persons, we were capable of striking a dialogue without fighting, because at the beginning, 16 years ago, it was a constant argument with the authorities. And by doing that, we're building the path to the search, location, and justice for them. But the most important obstacle that we have had, and which still persists, is called impunity and corruption. And this has been mirrored in the lack of political will, so that all the institutions which are responsible for the search and investigation can work in a coordinated manner in order to bring the missing persons back, to punish the culprits, and to prevent any additional enforced disappearances. Because as of today, we have received pictures of constant enforced disappearances. It's a pity, but there's only 46 rulings for disappearance against 120,000 cases of disappearance, and that is absolute and utter impunity. An example of advance and dialogue is the state of Coahuila, which has made headway in the massive forensic identification with the building of the Regional Center for the Human Identification, which recovered more than 1,500 bodies in common graves, and which has conducted thousands of samples from the families in the hope that they can identify as many bodies as possible and to bring them back home. What made the difference in this state against the other remaining 31 states is the joint task force bringing together all 8 collectives in the state, bringing together their forces to demand and build. And that's what we're trying to achieve. In Coahuila, we want to build a pilot project so that it's emulated by the rest of the states. That's why I bring this as a best practice. Which are the recommendations that I can share with you? Well, the first one is to include the relatives and the families in all processes regarding the missing persons, and to bring together all the families so that they work cross-sectionally in the streamlining of any public policy or any mechanism pursuing the prosecution of the crime and the finding of the missing person. Another piece of advice that I would like to give to the families, not just from Mexico, but from all around the world, is for them to listen. For them to listen to the organizations, to the experts, to the SID, to the task force, and the authorities need to listen to the families. We all want to pursue the same goal, to find the missing person, to avoid any additional disappearance, and to impart justice, which we're lacking, and to re-strengthen the states in their capacities to protect their citizens from these kinds of crimes, and for families to stay together, strategic and with love for their missing persons intact above any other kind of interest. There's still a long way to go, it's clear. As long as we have disappeared persons every day, as long as we don't bring back home each and every one of the thousands of disappeared persons, and as long as the 72,000 bodies are identified, as long as that's the case, we're not going to be able to bring justice, and impunity is going to continue to reign, and it's going to be utter and absolute. If we don't combat corruption, impunity is going to be absolute. If we wait and see for the state to conduct their work on their own and voluntarily, if we do that, impunity is going to continue to reign. If a mother needs to accept that the only thing that physically remains from their son is a slight part of a bone that started disintegrating, to know the whereabouts of the son, and we need to know that it's not if we don't consider that to be a human tragedy, impunity is going to reign. If the hearts of the world neglect this tragedy and this scourge, impunity is going to continue to reign. So, dear colleagues, let today be the beginning of a big bonfire that brings down that neglect, that stirs conscience, so that we can bring back our children and our families, because they were taken away alive and we want them alive, because they were taken away alive and we want them alive.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yolanda. And now I'll pass the floor over to Carla Quintana with two questions about the challenge of the special mechanism. What are the challenges for its starting up, its good functioning in the current context and in Syria? And how do you see the participation of the family members, organizations? We know the work has started recently, but there's previous work of colleagues who will contribute to further the cause. Carla, you have the floor. You have 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Carmen, Rosa. Good morning, everyone, colleagues, searchers the world over. I would like to start by going back to the works of Ms. Yolanda and what Federico shared with us about the Colombian experience. And it's the reason why today there is an institution to look for the disappeared in Syria. It's because of the fight of the families, as was the case in Mexico, in Colombia, as in the entire world. The response of the state or the international community cannot be understood without the struggle, the demands, and I would add, and I think we don't say this enough, the public policy building of all of these people, mainly women, to build and to demand these institutions and to demand to be part of the implementation process, the search process, and the results. I think this would be the first thing I want to say, and this takes me to the independent institution for the search of the disappeared of the missing persons in Syria. We have to learn from our experiences all over the world. This is the first specialized search institution in the United Nations, and it's only a few years old. And I think this is not only proof of the struggle of the families of the missing in Syria, but it is also proof of how comparative experiences have made the international community, the institutions, to separate research from search. And I would like to stress that the independent institution of missing persons in Syria is the only one existing under the UN. And answering the question of Carmen Rosa, I didn't forget it. The challenges are many. Here we have our colleagues from Mexico and from other places in the world, but I can talk about Mexico of my own experience. And I can say how difficult it is to, on a daily basis, build a search institution. And the challenges are huge, but hope is huge as well. One of the first challenges that we face at the Independent Institution on Missing Persons, IIMP, is first understanding who we're looking for. And the answer is we are looking for all of them. And when I say all of them, I mean it. Regardless of their nationality, their political views, their ethnicity, and the reason, regardless of the reason why they went missing. We may not know where they are because they were displaced because as we've seen in the latest news, there's been persons arbitrarily detained, tortured, and of course we look for them living, but based on the context that we've seen, we know there's the likelihood that we may find them not living. And I think, looking at the comparative international experience, we need to say and stress that identification is part of the project. When there are search mechanisms in the world, well, we have search on the one side, justice or justice institutions are on the one side, search is, and identification is on the other side, which is normally part of justice institutions. And in different parts of the world, this has been one of the greatest challenges, separating identification from search. And I'm not saying it's only a matter of search, but it's also a matter of justice, but we cannot separate that. And one of the first challenges is understanding who we are looking for. We're looking for all of them. Secondly, this takes us to knowing who we are looking for. These are two different things. We have an idea of the hundreds of thousands, 120,000, 140,000 reported as missing in Syria, but we do not have the certainty yet as to how many more. And of course, this is also related to the fear in submitting information. A great moment is opening up to get information on who we're looking for. And we have a big opportunity now to have a better record of who we're looking for. A third challenge, and I'll pick up my pace, it is a shared challenge the world over, is the fragmentation of information. Lack of information sharing, lack of protocols to protect information, and information management. We are in the 21st century. We have technology in our hands, but this is not only a technological and legal challenge, it's a challenge of political will. Of course, at this moment, we make a call, and we've done so previously, of asking all institutions, all persons, all organizations of civil society who have information to share any information they may have that can help us search for the missing in Syria. Number 4, a huge challenge, Ms. Yolanda already mentioned it in the context of Mexico, and it will not be different in Syria. It's possibly even greater, is the forensics challenge. We've seen in the news the horror of knowing that there are mass graves, clandestine graves in Syria. And the international experience, and I want to be very clear here, has proven that no one can do this on their own. We need to coordinate amongst ourselves, and the mandate of the independent institution is very clear in that, and I'll finish shortly. Another challenge, and this is still open because we are just starting this mandate, is how to coordinate with justice institutions.
lo que en inglés hablamos como Triple IM, que también es una
Triple
institución siria
IM,
sobre justicia, y
it's also a
nosotros
Syrian
como
institution
búsqueda, ese por
on
supuesto también
justice,
será
and we are a
un
search
camino que
institution.
vamos a recorrer y
And
esperamos
this
de
is
manera
a
muy
road
coordinada
we will travel, we hope, in a
con
very
las
coordinated
instituciones.
manner with all
Finalmente,
institutions.
la
Finally,
participación, y con esto quiero referirme
participation,
al
and with
otro
this I want
mandato
to
de la
refer to the
institución
other
independiente de Siria.
mandate of
Nosotros tenemos
the
dos mandatos.
Independent
Uno es buscar
Institution on Missing
a
Persons in
personas, la
Syria.
búsqueda de las personas
We have two
desaparecidas,
mandates.
y el
One is
otro
searching for the missing, and the
es
other one
brindar atención y trabajar de
is
manera participativa
offering
con,
care and working in a
con los
participatory
familiares de
manner
las personas
with
desaparecidas
the
en Siria. Esto es
relatives
muy
of
importante,
the
sumáis que el
disappeared
mandato
in
es
Syria. This is
muy
very
amplio
important. The
y
mandate
por
is very
supuesto que los
broad.
principios internacionales
And
son
of
muy
course,
claros.
international
Siempre
principles are
hablamos de
very clear.
participación
We always talk
y
about
algo
participation.
que es muy difícil de hacer en la
Something that is
práctica,
very
no,
difficult to
y eso no
do
quiere
in
decir que no se
practice,
intente
and this does
y
not
todos los
mean
días
we
estemos
do
en
not
eso, es,
try and
bueno,
we're
ok,
that it doesn't mean that we're
vamos a
not on it
participar.
on a
¿Cómo
daily basis.
logramos esa
But we'll
participación?
participate.
¿Cómo
How
logramos
do
que
we
todas las
get that
personas
participation?
posibles
How do we
participen?
make
Y no solo unos,
everyone who can
y, ¿no?
participate
Entonces,
do so?
eso es un gran reto y es
And
una de
this is a big
nuestras
challenge,
obligaciones
and it's
principales, y
one
por
of our
supuesto que estamos
main
eh,
obligations.
comprometidas y comprometidos a que esto se va a
And we
lograr.
are committed
Termino,
to
Carmen Rosa,
making
nada
it.
más
I'll finish,
recordando
Carmen
que
Rosa, just
nuestro
by
mandato, hay que
saying,
subrayar, es
I'm
humanitario,
reminding you that our
con
mandate is a
la
humanitarian one,
obligación de buscarles a
with the
todas
obligation
y
of
a todos. Muchas
searching for
gracias.
them all. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Intervinientes. Voy a abrir el espacio para el video.
I will now make room for the video. Thank you for keeping to the allotted time. And if we can show the video to close this part of the panel, because then we will move on to the second segment of this same panel.
El Perú padeció
For more
por
than
más de
2
2
decades,
décadas un periodo de
Peru
violencia
suffered
iniciado por Sendero
from
Luminoso en mayo de
violence started by Sendero
1980 y que
Luminoso.
continuó hasta noviembre del 2000,
Till November
tiempo en el que se
2020, there
perpetraron
were
diversas
several
violaciones
violations
a
of
los
human
derechos humanos
rights,
de miles de
thousands
peruanos
of
y peruanas,
Peruvians,
tanto por
both
personas
perpetrated
vinculadas a
by
grupos
people linked to
terroristas como a las
terrorist
acciones de
groups and
diversos
different
agentes
state
estatales, como parte de una
actors
política
as
instaurada de lucha
part
contra subversiva,
of
y que nos dejó,
their fight.
conforme
And
concluyó la
as
Comisión de la
the
Verdad y
Committee for Truth and
Reconciliación, la lamentable
Reconciliation
cifra de casi 70.000 afectados. Si
measured,
bien
the
fue la
figure was of
CBR quien
70,000
recomendó, entre otras cosas, la creación de un
affected. There was
subsistema
a
especializado que
subsystem
pudiera
created
investigar,
to
procesar y
investigate,
sancionar las graves
process and
violaciones a los derechos
sanction
humanos
the
acaecidas durante
violations
el
of human
periodo de
rights.
violencia, fueron primordialmente las
But
incontables solicitudes de las
the
organizaciones de
victims'
víctimas,
associations,
especialmente de ANFACEP, fundada
claims
por
and
la señora
requests,
Angélica
especially
Mendoza y otras
Alpha-Thep,
mujeres quechohablantes de Ayacucho en
founded by Ms. Mendoza and
1983.
others.
Pido a la Comisión de la Verdad que logremos la justicia.
We want
Queremos
to
buscar la
look
verdad
for
definitiva.
truth.
No podríamos entrar a una
There cannot be
reconciliación si no
reconciliation if we
encontramos
cannot
la
find
justicia y la
justice and
paz.
peace.
Que dieron como
This led
resultado que en
to, in
noviembre del
November
2004, la Fiscalía de la Nación creara el Subsistema de
24,
Derechos Humanos,
the
el
prosecutor
cual actualmente cuenta
creating
con 38 despachos
the system of
fiscales a
human
nivel nacional
rights
y
with
tiene competencia
competencies
para
to
investigar,
investigate,
entre otros
amongst
delitos,
others,
contra la humanidad como el de
crimes
desaparición
against
forzada.
humanity, such as that of
En estos más de
enforced
20 años de
disappearance.
trabajo
In these years of
especializado,
specialized work,
nos
we've
hemos
dealt
encargado de
with
diversos casos
many
emblemáticos
key
cuyos hechos han sido
cases
de
that have
conocimiento y
been
pronunciamiento
made
por parte de
known
órganos del sistema interamericano, como
by
la Corte
to the
Interamericana
Inter-American
o la
Court, the
Comisión
Inter-American
Interamericana de Derechos Humanos.
Committee of Human Rights. We
Investigamos,
investigate,
procesamos y logramos sentencias condenatorias en favor de ciudadanos y
we
ciudadanas de las zonas rurales
work
más
for the
humildes de nuestro
citizens of
país,
the
cuya
humblest
lengua materna en su gran mayoría es el
areas
quechua.
of our country.
La desaparición forzada es uno
Enforced
de los
disappearance
crímenes
is
más
one of
atroces que
the most
afectan nuestra
atrocious
esencia como
crimes that
seres humanos,
affect ourselves as
ya que
human
dejan a
beings.
la víctima en total
The
indefensión al colocarla
victim
en un limbo
is
jurídico.
left
Y además provoca en los familiares más
helpless,
directos
and
un duelo o
it
luto
leads
eterno, manteniéndolos en
to
un estado expectante ante las
a
posibles
prolonged
noticias o información,
state
por más
of
mínima que sea, sobre el
grief
paradero de la
and a lack
víctima,
of
resistiéndose
information
al
and
olvido y sosteniéndose de
expectancy of
manera
information
imperecedera
on the
y
victim,
atemporal de la esperanza de encontrarlo, tal vez con vida.
protecting the hope
Actualmente el
for finding
Subsistema de
them
Derechos
alive.
Humanos e
The System of Human
Interculturalidad del Perú
Rights of
tiene a su cargo
Peru
aproximadamente 292
is now
casos
dealing with
de
over
desaparición
290
forzada a nivel
cases of
nacional.
enforced disappearances.
Para poder concretar de manera
To be
eficaz y
able to
adecuada la labor
complete
de determinar,
the
desde el
task, since
2013 el
2015, the
Ministerio
Public
Público
Ministry
cuenta
has
con
a
equipo
specialized
forense
forensics
especializado,
team, a
equipo
committed, sensitive,
comprometido, sensible y
and capable
capacitado
team
para afrontar casos tan
that faces
complejos como los de
cases as
desaparición
complex as
forzada.
those of enforced disappearances.
Equipo que de manera conjunta con la
Together with
Unidad de
molecular
Biología Molecular y
biology
Genética
and
de Ayacucho,
genetics in
han
Yacucha,
recuperado hasta la
they
actualidad
have
más de
retrieved
4.206 individuos, de los
more than
cuales más de 3.024 han
4,200
sido
individuals. More than
identificados.
3,000
De ese
have been
universo de
identified.
personas,
Out of that
más
universe
de
of people,
2.916 han sido
more than
entregados de manera digna
2,200
a sus
have been
familiares.
delivered to their
Aunado al
relatives in a
trabajo
dignified
desplegado
manner.
por el Ministerio
In
Público, en el Perú
Peru,
se cuenta desde el
since
2007 con la
2007,
Ley
we had law
30.470, que dispone como labor
30,470
estatal la búsqueda de personas
for the
desaparecidas durante
search
el periodo de
of
violencia,
the
teniendo como
disappeared
ente rector al
during the
Ministerio de
period of
Justicia y
violence
Derechos Humanos a través de la
under
Dirección
the
General de
Ministry
Búsqueda
of
de Personas
Justice.
Desaparecidas.
This
Esta dirección tiene a su
department
cargo, entre otros,
is
el
in
Registro
charge of
Nacional
the
de
National
Desaparecidos y
Registry
Sitios de
of the
Entierro,
Disappeared, of the
RENADE,
Missing,
oficina que reporta
and an office
actualmente a
that
más de 22.000 personas desaparecidas.
has
De lo
received the report
expuesto,
of over
se desprende que
22,000
existen
missing.
en el Perú
In
dos
Peru, there are two
sistemas a través de
systems
los que se
through
realiza la
which to
búsqueda
carry
de
out the
personas
search
desaparecidas,
of the missing.
a cargo del Subsistema de Derechos
The
Humanos e
Human Rights and
Interculturalidad y
Interculturality
otro
System,
por
and another
parte del
one
Ministerio de
under
Justicia y
the
Derechos Humanos
Justice and Human
a través de
Rights
la Dirección General de Búsqueda de
Ministry and
Personas
the General
Desaparecidas.
Management of
Entendiendo la
the
necesidad de
search for the
realizar un
missing.
trabajo coordinado y sostenido entre ambas
We need
instituciones, es que
coordinated
actualmente está
work
vigente
between the two,
una
and this has
directiva sobre
led
lineamientos del
to a
trabajo fiscal,
guideline
así
on
como
prosecutor
convenios de
work
cooperación
and
interinstitucional entre ambas
interinstitutional
entidades.
agreements
Como
between both.
muestra
As a
tangible del
tangible
compromiso
proof
estatal e
of the
institucional de
institutional
saldar la deuda pendiente que
commitment
tenemos como
to
sociedad con las personas
repay the
desaparecidas,
debts,
el Ministerio
the
Público
public
inicialmente en el
ministry,
2018, a través de la
through
resolución
the
de la Fiscalía de la
resolution
Nación
of
49-2018
the tax
MPFN,
ministry,
aprobó la
the
Directiva General
prosecutor approved
01-2018,
a
ejercicio de
resolution
la función fiscal en la búsqueda de
for
personas
the
desaparecidas
search of the
1980 al
missing
2000,
in the
en el
framework
marco de la Ley
of Law
30.470. Ante la necesidad de
30,470.
mejorar el trabajo
Under the
encomendado,
need of
se
carrying out
dejó sin efecto
this
las normas antes
work,
citadas y
a
se
set of
aprobó la
rules
directiva
was
denominada
left
Lineamientos para
without
el ejercicio de la función fiscal en la búsqueda de personas desaparecidas mediante resolución de la Fiscalía de la Nación
effect
número
and moved on to this new
2989-2019, MPFN
law
de
of
fecha 30 de
30th
octubre del
October
2019.
2019.
Sin embargo, estos lineamientos
These
requerían ser
guidelines have
actualizados
to
dado los
be
cambios en la competencia material
updated
del Subsistema Especializado
due
de
to the
Derechos Humanos e
changes in
Interculturalidad
the
dispuestos en el año
were
2023.
changed by
Por ello,
the
desde la Coordinación Nacional de la Fiscalía Superior Penal Nacional y Fiscalías Penales
amendments in
Supraprovinciales especializadas en
2023.
derechos humanos e interculturalidad en mi cargo, se dispuso la conformación del
A
grupo de trabajo
task
para la
force was
actualización
created
de esta directiva,
for the application of the
el cual
guideline,
tenía entre sus miembros a fiscales de diversas regiones del
including
país, además
prosecutors
de
of
los
different regions,
representantes del equipo
representatives of the
forense
specialized
especializado,
forensics team, the
de la
unit of
Unidad de
molecular
Biología
biology,
Molecular y la
the general
Dirección General de
management
Búsqueda
for
de
the
Personas
search of the
Desaparecidas,
missing,
contando con el
with the
invaluable
invaluable
apoyo
technical and
técnico y
logistical
logístico
support of the
del Comité
International
Internacional
Committee
de
of
la
the
Cruz
Red
Roja.
Cross.
El conjunto de
The pool of
conocimientos,
knowledge,
experiencia,
experiences,
compromiso
commitment,
y
and
especialización
specialization
de
of
los
the
profesionales que
professionals
conformaron este
that
mencionado
make up
grupo
this group
hizo
made
posible
it
la
possible
aprobación
to
de la
pass the
directiva para el
guideline for the
ejercicio de la
exercise of
función
the
fiscal
prosecutor
en la
function
búsqueda de
in the
personas
search
desaparecidas
for
en
the
su versión
missing
1,
version 1,
aprobada mediante
approved
resolución
by
de
a
la Fiscalía de la
resolution
Nación
of the
2042-2024
State
de fecha 20
Prosecutor
de
September
septiembre del año
20,
2024.
2024.
La actual
The
directiva está
current
centrada en las víctimas de
directive
graves
is
violaciones a los
based
derechos humanos,
on the
entre ellos
victims
las
of violations
víctimas de
of human
desaparición
rights, amongst
forzada,
them those
contribuyendo
victims of
a la
enforced
reivindicación de los derechos conculcados.
disappearance.
Esta
This
directiva precisa la
directive
competencia,
leads
organización, deberes y funciones de las Fiscalías
to
de Derechos Humanos,
the rights and
establece un mecanismo más
duties.
célere para
It
la búsqueda de las
establishes
personas
a
desaparecidas
fastest
y la
search
coordinación con las
mechanism and the
demás entidades
collaboration with
involucradas en
other
el tema.
entities. It
Orienta la
guides the
acción del
actions of
Ministerio
the
Público en el propósito de concretar
ministry and the
una acción
purpose
eficaz,
of
articulada y humanitaria en la
leading
ubicación,
to a
recuperación y entrega de
well-coordinated and
restos
effective
humanos.
action to retrieve
Todo lo antes indicado evidencia
and deliver
el trabajo desplegado por
human
los fiscales de
remains.
derechos humanos, personal forense, Dirección General
all
de
of
Búsqueda
the
de Personas
groups
Desaparecidas,
involved
lo que ha permitido que cientos
have
de
worked so
familias
that
puedan cumplir con
hundreds
la
of
costumbre
families
tan propia
have been
y común en
able
nuestro país
to
del entierro y
proceed
del
to
duelo.
a burial
Tener un lugar donde
and
rezarles,
grieving,
prender una vela,
being able to
llorarlos,
light a
llevarles
candle,
unas flores. Esa
take
certeza de
flowers
saberlos
to
en un
the
lugar
grave of their
conocido
loved ones.
acaba con la incertidumbre dolorosa
This
que
ends with the
lamentablemente se
painful
llevaron hasta el último suspiro
uncertainty
las madres y padres que, como la señora Angélica
for these
Mendoza de
fathers
Escarza,
and
murieron
mothers
sin
like
saber
Miss
dónde
Angelica, who
estaban
died
sus
without
seres queridos.
knowing where their loved ones were.
Todo ello nos devuelve
This
la confianza
brings
en las
back
autoridades y
trust in the
demuestra el
authorities,
compromiso férreo que como
and
institución
proves
tiene
the
el Ministerio
commitment of the
Público
public
con los
ministry
derechos humanos y
to
la
human
lucha
rights and the
contra la
fight against
impunidad.
impunity.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your participation. We will now move on to the second segment. At the end of the presentation of the second segment, in this panel, we will also have the opportunity to receive some questions. This is what we discussed with my colleague. And I would like to close this first section to say that search without justice is absolute impunity. And justice without search is lack of humanity. Thank you very much.
Bueno, buenos días. ¿Se oye? Sí.
Good morning.
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Wilder Tyler. Soy de Uruguay.
I'm Wilder
de la
Tan
Institución Nacional
from
de
Uruguay, from the
Derechos Humanos
National
y
Institution for Human
estoy a
Rights,
cargo de la búsqueda de los detenidos
and
desaparecidos
I'm in charge of the
en mi
search of
país.
the arrested and
Este segmento tiene
disappeared in my country.
un nombre
This panel
escueto.
has a very short title, which is the
Pero vamos
technical
a
experience, but
abordar
we're going to tackle
distintos.
different.
¿Me escucha ahora? Sí. Aquí.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Distintos aspectos de los
We're going to
conocimientos
tackle many different
técnicos
aspects
en los
of
procesos de
the
búsqueda,
technical aspects
incluidos
involved in the
los
searches,
métodos forenses,
including forensic
la
methods,
recopilación de datos, yo
the
diría
gathering of data,
también quizá
and I would
métodos
dare
y
to say
fórmulas
maybe methods
investigativas
and
de conducir las investigaciones
formulae to
y la
conduct
gestión de
the
bases de datos.
investigation, and then the
Y además
management
también
of
ha
databases.
destacado la importancia
And then we also
de
have the importance
la
of
cooperación y compartir las
cooperation
mejores
and the
prácticas
sharing of
que nuestros
best
panelistas
practices.
puedan contribuir.
And our panel speakers are going to contribute to that.
Tenemos
So
un
we have
panel variado y muy rico
a varied, very rich
colegas.
panel
A mi derecha está
of dear
Luis
colleagues. To my right, I have Luis von de Brieder from
Luis
Argentina.
es expresidente del
Luis
equipo
is the
argentino de
former president
antropología
of the
forense
Argentinian Forensic
y
Anthropological
exdirector de
Team
la unidad
and former
forense
director
del
of
6R.
the ICRC Forensic Unit.
Tenemos a Madame
We
Fadwa
also
Mahmoud
have Madame
de
Fadwa
Siria,
Mahmoud from Syria,
Familias por la Libertad,
from
sobre el
Families
ejemplo
for
del
Freedom,
marco que promueve la
and that's a
participación
framework that
familiar.
fosters the
Fundadora del
participation of
movimiento
families,
Familias por la
founder
Libertad.
of
Madame
the
Fadwa
Families for
es
Freedom
activista,
movement.
es antigua
She's an
presa
activist.
política
She
y
used to be
espera a
a
su hijo
political
Omer
prisoner, and
y a su marido
she's waiting for Abdulaziz Al-Gahir and his son, detained by the Syrian government in 2012. And we also count on the presence of Emmanuel Diouf. Emmanuel Diouf is a commissioner from the National Human Rights Commission of Gambia, and they have also participated in the enforced disappearances cases. So let's begin with the contributions, with the interventions. I'm going to ask Luis to, in principle, well, Luis is working in a discipline that for those of us who are not specialists, it's moving at a staggering pace, and we are amazed by the degree of advances, technical advances, and the huge pace at which everything evolves. So if you could talk about the forensic contribution in the search and investigation processes and the evolution of forensic tools, and which would be the most ideal mechanisms in order to develop a search and location process, particularly in situations of emergency. And some key elements for the participation and engagement of the relatives of the victim and the accompanying organizations in the processes of search. It's almost a complete program, and we lend you 7 minutes to cover all of that. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm going to talk about the balance of where we are heading for in the forensic world in a state of the situation, but nuanced by the reality. Any construction is collective. You don't have the best forensic team or the best mechanism of search, and we're accumulating good or bad practices throughout the years, regardless of whether we like it or not. So we need to have memory to know what was done, what wasn't done, and how to improve. Only 13 countries in the world have forensic search mechanisms that have been ongoing for 10 years. Out of those 13, 7 are in Latin America, 4 in Europe, Ukraine, Spain, Cyprus, and Georgia, and another one in the Middle East, which is Iraq. The rest of the countries have done practically 0 or more ad hoc efforts, and that's related to the political will, the real political will of what's done and what's not done. On a forensic level, we have obviously contributed to that process, and quite modestly, we have contributed to providing with pieces of evidence to the justice, to the identification for relatives, capacity building of the relatives who unfortunately need to become forensic experts in many places of the world because of the lack of operation or efficiency of the methods by the state. And we have done the proper handling of the remains of the person, which is not often talked about, but which is really important. And at the same time, we have many challenges. Just to give an idea, in Latin America, there's approximately 400 forensic anthropologists, and only Colombia boasts 142. So it's very minimum what we can achieve. And in the rest of the world, apologies to talk about Latin America because it's a part of the world where more search programs and identification programs have been conducted, and the results are null. In Africa, there's barely any forensic anthropologist. The same goes for the Middle East and Pacific Asia. For these 40 years, I have been working in 65 countries of the world, performing searches for any kind of mechanisms, and the realities are those. That's what we are confronted with on a day-to-day basis. And there's also technical challenges. Science is not magic. Science has limitations, and there's people who are never going to be found, and there's bodies who are never going to be identified, and we need to convey that to the families. We should not treat the relatives as children who don't understand. They are adults who understand, and that's the reality that we live with every day. If we take a look at the figures of recovery of a body, 1,000 in Guatemala, in Iraq, 12,000 when there's an enormous amount of disappeared, and this is a permanent work. We cannot create mechanisms with barely 5 years of mandate or with a yearly mandate. We need to have mechanisms which are permanent, autonomous, and with their own budget. And that's another important topic. Just to give you specific data, the Black Hawk military helicopter costs between $25 and $35 million. Let's find out which are the budgets allocated for the search mechanisms in the world. They're minimum, and that has to do with political will. Another important topic is the process of identification. Regrettably, let me tell you, it doesn't work like in the films where you put a piece of a bone and you have a result. That does not exist. Identification is a process where all the information that we gather and which is provided by the relatives needs to be evaluated and handled as lines of evidence that are going to yield a positive, negative conclusion, and sometimes an exclusion conclusion. For example, Colombia has hundreds of thousands of disappeared, but it has 7 million people who are displaced from their place of origin. Where do we ask for the relatives to ask for those samples? So we need to confront the wishes and the data and the real data. And there's also technical constraints. Sometimes the ground is very acid and it eats up the remains of the bodies, and we cannot do anything about it. Mechanisms. Well, I have been working for local justice, commissions for truth, humanitarian commissions, etc. And there's new mechanisms that collide with the traditional mechanisms of the state, and that requires time. But we also talk about the participation of the relatives in the recent year. What does it mean, the participation of the relatives? That the relatives and their organization need to be sitting at the table where political decisions are going to be made. That's the real participation of the relatives, and it doesn't happen too often. They're invited for the final picture, they're invited for the sample for the genetic analysis, but then they go home and they don't know what happened with their case. So if we're talking about political will and to engage the relatives, we need to have them sit at the decision-making table because we're deciding about their loved ones. Only one country was participatory. In the year 2006, there was a mistake in the identification, and the president created a committee, and the 6 Chilean groups were sitting together from day zero, from scratch, in the scientific and political decision-making tables, and they had a voice and a vote, but that doesn't happen too often, so we need to change that. And then we need to talk about the fact that more and more often we put more burdens on the shoulders of the relatives. It's admirable to see the Mexican and Colombian search efforts, but it's not their task to dig. They do it out of despair because the state is inefficient or has neglected that obligation, but we cannot bestow that burden on the shoulders of the relatives, and the states need to take on that baton. There's different ways of and different approaches and mechanisms. The most important model is the search unit in Colombia with 550 public officers, with 96 forensic specialists who have been hired in Colombia, and dozens of centers. The other mechanisms boast advantages and disadvantages. I think that today we can do more, we can contribute more to the searches, but unfortunately with modest results. The academia result has turned their backs on the relatives in all of our countries. With certain exceptions, there's barely any program on how to search and recover bodies in forensic cases like this. There's very little. Colombia right now, which is the one that boasts the highest amount of forensic anthropologists after the US, only has one training program. Universities are not interested in helping the relatives, and I regret to say it because I was trained at a university, but that's the reality. This has changed. There's people who are more or less engaged and involved, but when they see a relative, they get scared or they don't want to get involved because it's politicized. To wrap up, let me share with you that I believe that we need to reinforce these gatherings. Let's not think that we need to reinvent the wheel. We have had 40 commissions of truth, 6 courts and mechanisms of the United Nations. And anytime we create something, we believe that we are alone in the world. We need to collect evidences. It has been done for decades in the world. And what you do every year, well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. This is included in the previous evidence. So I think that we need to acknowledge that this is a collective experience, that we're barely one small sector contributing with other sectors to the same purpose, and we need to think more in terms of the families and less in ourselves. Thank you very much, Luis, for this reflection and for tackling some of the most harsh challenges that we're facing. And I think that in Uruguay, we're going to ask for the budget of half a chopper, half a helicopter's budget, and that would allow for 10 years worth of work. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now, I would like to ask Ms. Fadwa Mahmoud to take the floor. And the questions that I would like to address to you have to do with the following. First, the challenges, the current challenges that you're facing regarding the search of the missing people in Syria. If you could talk about the development of mutual support measures and any actions and strategies that are being developed from the stop of the Assad regime. And we would like to know whether your organization has received support of international organizations or national organizations to conduct your task. Which is the experience that you can share with us on this field? And please stick to the 7 minutes allocated. Thank you.
أول شيء شكرا للدعوة وشكرا لوجودي معكم. بدي استغل الفرصة وأقول أول شيء مبروك للشعب السوري ولسوريا بسقوط الطاغية يلي
I would like to thank you for the invitation
سقط هذا الطاغية.
After 50 years worth of dictatorship, I congratulate myself for the overthrowing of Assad, and let's hope that the suffering can stop with this. What I would like to say is that our fight since 2011, in addition to the previous period, to 2011, because Assad's regime came from the 70s with enforced disappearances and illegal arrests. And I had suffered disappointment, and my son, who disappeared, was barely 9 years old. So we were already working in order to put a stopper to this Syrian tragedy, but regrettably it continued. So, well, one day my husband and my son were enforcibly made to disappear, and they have been disappeared since 2011, and we harbored many hopes that after the overthrowing of the dictator, we would hold information on the disappeared, but unfortunately that has not been the case. What I mean to say is that we, as families, well, I personally would like to talk about my experience in Syria. At the beginning, we were fighting as individual groups in silos, disconnected from one another. But later on, we have come to be organized in a movement which is called the movement of the families, which brings together many families. At the beginning, there were only 5 women. We have 150 families involved, and we have visited many different countries, and we claim basic rights, basically the right to be able to see our loved ones in the prisons, and we haven't achieved that, unfortunately. So maybe the international community, maybe the organizations did not support us appropriately. In spite of all this, notwithstanding all the suffering that we have gone through for the last 14 years, we haven't fallen into despair. We were still present at all the fora, at all the events. We were talking about the arrests, the illegal arrests, and the enforced disappearances. And we spoke up, and we were replied that there was nothing they could do because the regime was very strong and couldn't be challenged. But now that the regime has been overthrown and the doors are open, but regrettably, we still haven't achieved any information. But the result of our fight has led us to a situation in which we have been capable of getting organized in groups, so that, as stated before by Ms. Carla, and I congratulate you for presiding and chairing this organization, well, we have fought a lot to build up this institution for 3 and 4 years, and we have fought a lot. All families have, until we have finally approved the setting up of this institution, and this has been approved by 83 states, and we have a UN resolution. So I believe that this is the result of the fight of the families, and I think that this institution, well, we want to become partners of this institution in all the steps to be undertaken, because families are the main source of any information and everything that needs to be unveiled if we want to locate the whereabouts and the fate of our loved ones. Because previously we were told that they couldn't do anything for us, but nowadays they can. Many things can be done for us. And we cannot neglect or sideline the presence and the contribution of the mothers or the wives or the daughters. So it's important to do advocacy and to work with the families. Regarding the international organizations, well, they can deal with the forensic side or the technical side. But what I would like to say from here, from this stand, is that we are not going to allow for any kind of neglect or negligence regarding the search and the investigation in cases of enforced disappearances. We are claiming something very basic, which is the right to know the truth. And I, as a mother, maybe I will never see my son, but I would like to find out the truth about it. I have the right to know the truth. I know my son. If I find his remains, I will know him, and this will allow me to grieve properly. I'm not here as Fadwa Mahmoud, but on behalf of dozens of thousands of families in Syria. And I would like to say that this is the responsibility of the international community, and the international organizations are responsible to find out the truth, and we're not going to allow for any kind of negligence on this respect. And I would also like to say that this fine institution, this autonomous institution, is supposed to start working right now, as soon as possible. It's really important that we get started now, and we would like to say that the institution in which we bestow a lot of hope, I don't know if you are following the information, but we can say that that mother who is looking for her son, she has the right to find out the truth, and they are entitled to get attention by this institution for them to bring them peace of mind. And we have been fighting for years until we reach that point. We're not asking for something impossible. All we ask for is to achieve the truth, and this is not hard. 14 years ago, we're being told, for 14 years, we have been told that they were going to do a lot when the dictatorship is overthrown. Well, look, it has been overthrown. The dictator is no longer there. So this is the right time. It is your responsibility, and in spite of all the suffering and all the pain, we are going to continue with our fight. And we're going to continue observing and monitoring everything that has to do with the enforced arrests and disappearances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Fatwa Mahmoud, for your testimonial and for speaking clearly, dotting the I's, as we say, and reminding us of our functions. The last panelist of this segment is colleague Emmanuel Diouf from the National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia, involved in the efforts to face enforced disappearances. There are three aspects we would like for you to discuss: the fact that effective measures have been taken to comply with the recommendations of the Truth Commission, to continue looking for the persons disappeared between 1994 and 2017. So how is that process going? The action plan of the National Committee for Human Rights for 2021-2025 is a strategy to make sure that the persons whose rights have been violated have access to reparation, and in that we'd like for you to share your experience, especially in terms of the support offered to the families of the victims of enforced disappearances. And finally, if you could maybe tell us a bit about the work you do with the guidelines on the protection of all persons against enforced disappearances in Africa, adopted by the American Commission. And for that, I would ask you to use 7 minutes of our time. Thank you very much.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank the conference organizers for this very, very, very important Congress. Yes, let me begin by perhaps giving some context here. The Gambia underwent 22 years of dictatorship under President Jammeh. And when he was defeated at the polls and sent into exile, the new government decided to come up with a transitional justice program. And one of it was the setting up of a Truth, Reconciliation and Reparation Commission, the TRRC. The TRRC was mandated to set a historical record of what happened during that period of dictatorship of Jammeh, to also, at the end of it, recommend prosecution for those who bear the greatest burden, and also recommend reparation for victims. One of the thematic areas that the TRRC, the Truth Commission, looked at was enforced disappearance. They investigated the whereabouts of missing persons in the Gambia, and during that period of investigation, of course, oral testimonies came out of burial sites. And of course, family members came out and spoke about their disappeared members. And I'm just giving context here too, because it's important. We're talking about the role of technical expertise in the search process to see if things are not done properly, it becomes very problematic. So the TRRC, during their investigation process, as I said, discovered 5 burial sites. And they straight away started looking at one of them, which was one of the biggest military barracks, where witness testimonies came that at least 11 soldiers were executed and buried. The fact of the matter is that the Truth Commission summoned the excavation of the site. Now the problem came. Yes, they were informed that 11 were buried. The site was excavated. One, even the tools used were not proper. Number 2, they found 7 skeletons, but they could not even identify who does that. There were 11 people. Who are these people? I'm just explaining where the problem even started. Those bodies were recovered, put in coffins, and they had to be taken to the mortuary. The problem was that we didn't have experts, forensic methods. This is essential, really, if you are going to identify human remains, especially human remains that were long-term, over 20, close to 25 years. We didn't have DNA analysis, forensic anthropology, which of course we know are critical in exhumation to establish identities and cause of death. So this was a major problem. Even the handling of and preservation of the remains is still a big question. We have these remains in a mortuary. How are they even kept? Now the TRRC concluded its findings. It also therefore made recommendations. And these recommendations, one, they said that the government should prosecute the former president and his hit squad for the unlawful disappearances and killing of victims. That is fine. And that the government should also set up a task force to inquire and investigate the fate of the whereabouts of missing persons. And they should take also immediate steps to identify and preserve the suspected burial sites. They should also collaborate with countries, other countries, ICRC, and other organizations, mainly in Latin America, to help in the process. And also, very important, it was stated, to engage victims and families, and also to offer reparation. Now, the National Human Rights Commission, it's mandated to promote and protect human rights, but it was also in the recommendations of the TRRC that the National Human Rights Commission, which I'm the chairperson, should monitor the implementation of those recommendations and report to the National Assembly every year on the status of implementation. So here we come in. And one of the things we are looking at, where are we with enforced disappearances? Because this is what we are monitoring. And I think that was what the question that was asked, effective measures to comply with TRRC. So we are holding the government of the Gambia to account. How is the government going to effectively comply with? They have accepted that they will implement the recommendations of the TRRC, set up a task force to identify, investigate the fate of the whereabouts of missing persons, and so here comes the issues. One of the things that, of course, we found out, and we have engaged the government, is capacity gaps. There are big capacity gaps. And I started by explaining to you when actually the TRRC was ongoing, when they got information about the burial sites at the military camp, they jumped in, started the process, and they discovered, yes, it's important we have testimonies, but it's more than that. And an important thing, even during the excavation, it was mentioned here, family members were even shocked because what they saw was on TV, excavation trucks going and excavating, and nobody informed them. So it was so insensitive. You know, we know our loved ones are buried here. Nobody told us. What we saw was, and where are the remains? And they could not even identify who the particular remains belong to. So these are the issues that the National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia is taking up with the government. But just to tell you, not only with the government, but we have even, as an institution, sent 2 of our staff for training organized by the Foundation of Anthropology and Forensic in Guatemala. We have done that in both Guatemala and also in Rwanda. And I believe that Anaket, are they working with Argentina to assist? Because we discovered that there's one thing to talk about investigation, but there are capacity gaps. And this is where the NHRC is coming in. And from our staff that has been trained in forensic investigation, documentation, and community engagement, what we have quickly done, and is ongoing next month, we are having our staff doing step-down training so that what they learn will come out to the communities, security forces. The good thing is, of course, during that period, the Gambia has ratified the convention, which is great. And yesterday we had the representative of the state of the Gambia said that they will domesticate because we have a dual list system in our country. You can ratify, but because you cannot use those in the domestic courts if you have not domesticated. We are going to do that. But then we have a problem. The problem is that we have, the TRRC has recommended the prosecution of Yaya Jammeh and 69 people for these crimes. What are we doing? The good thing is that the Gambia has worked very closely with the ECOWAS, and we have developed special mechanisms, yes, yes, special mechanisms which will allow now us to, in the prosecution, to use enforced disappearance and crimes against humanity. Just to say that our action plan, as a National Human Rights Commission that has been mandated to promote, protect, and also monitor the implementation, we are going to work with victims, civil society organizations, victim families, to make sure, just quickly to also say that we have been pressuring the government to an extent that today we have a law, the Reparation Act, and the commission has just been set up. They will start sitting to give reparation to family victims of enforced disappearances and other things. I could 7 minutes is so short, but this is the process that the National Human Rights Commission has been using. But really, collaborative effort, victim-centered, is important. Sharing best practices, working very closely with organizations, especially in Latin America, and so that we can get the expertise needed for this. Thank you very much.
Bueno. Muchas gracias, Emmanuel Juf.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel Juf. We have a note from the organizers of the conference. We've had to cut the time we had for questions and answers, unfortunately, which was about 10 minutes. I think we've done everything right by the book. I think maybe the issue is the time at which we started, but well, we will need to have a short break before the next panel comes in. So we had some time for moderator conclusions, but for us to finish on time, I would pass the floor over to Carmen. I will yield my time. I will offer it to Carmen.
No hay, es lo que nos acaban de plantear.
No, they just told us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Wilder. I think it's been a very enriching panel which has allowed us to see both sides, search, investigation, the side of forensics. I wanted to summarize it in 3 words: political will, financial resources, human resources, and installed human capacity to be able to carry out all processes, both searching, investigation, and the tasks that are important to achieve justice, truth, reparation, and especially a guarantee of no repetition. And with that, mainly I would like to thank the participants who've been here in the first section: Federico, Carla, Ms. Yolanda, Mr. Yoff, Ms. Wada, and Luis, and of course, my co-moderator, Wilder Tyler, for this opportunity to talk to you about something that is so important: search, truth, justice, reparation, and the guarantee of no repetition. So thank you for your presence in this panel.